Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are pulling back the curtain on stories that the powerful would rather you never connect. From children's artwork being confiscated inside American detention centers, to women facing life in prison for a kiss in Uganda, to billions flowing into sports spectacles while fundamental rights are being trampled, tonight, we follow the money and the power.
I'm Maya Clarity, and this is not your typical news roundup. Tonight we have a ProPublica investigation that should make every parent's blood run cold. Guards at a family detention center in Texas literally ripping drawings out of children's hands. We have a story from Uganda that exposes the human cost of weaponized morality laws. And we have a Hong Kong budget announcement that reveals how authoritarian governments use bread and circuses to distract from deeper crackdowns. Let's get to work.
We're also tracking two fascinating developments in neuroscience from Nature that have implications far beyond the lab: research into how the brain assigns credit for learning, and a compound that enhances memory but only in female mice. The science matters, but so do the questions about who funds this research, who benefits, and whose bodies are still treated as afterthoughts in medical science.
So buckle in. We've got 5 stories, and by the end of tonight's show, you're going to see the thread that connects every single one of them. That thread is control: who has it, who's fighting to keep it, and who's being crushed underneath it.
Let's start where the story is most urgent, inside the walls of the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, Texas.
Alex, this one comes from an investigative report by ProPublica, and the details are genuinely disturbing. According to their reporting, parents detained at the Dilley facility are describing a sudden and aggressive clampdown that began after children started sharing their stories, through artwork, through conversations, through the simple act of expressing what they've experienced. Guards reportedly began seizing children's drawings and art projects. Let that sink in. We are talking about the United States government confiscating crayon drawings from kids.
And it gets worse. ProPublica's reporting describes guards eavesdropping on conversations between parents and their children, between families and legal advocates. Parents told ProPublica that the atmosphere inside Dilley shifted dramatically, that there was a clear, coordinated effort to suppress any documentation of what life is like inside these walls. The children's art wasn't just decoration. It was testimony. And somebody in that chain of command understood that, which is exactly why they took it.
Let's put this in context for our viewers. The Dilley Detention Center is the largest family immigration detention facility in the United States. It's operated by ICE but run by a private contractor, CoreCivic, formerly known as the Corrections Corporation of America. This is a for-profit company. They make money for every bed that's filled. And when children inside their facility start producing visual evidence of their conditions, the corporate incentive is crystal clear: silence them.
What strikes me about this story, Maya, is the specific targeting of children's art. This isn't an accident. Art is one of the few ways that young children, many of whom don't speak English, many of whom are processing trauma from their journeys to the border, can communicate what's happening to them. Therapists and child psychologists have long recognized that children's drawings are windows into their emotional and psychological state. When a child draws a cage, or a crying parent, or a guard with a weapon, that drawing becomes evidence.
And that's exactly why it's being taken. According to the parents who spoke with ProPublica, the confiscation wasn't random. It happened after advocacy groups and legal organizations began using children's artwork to document conditions inside Dilley. The drawings were showing up in court filings, in media reports, in congressional briefings. The artwork was doing what journalism sometimes can't: it was making the invisible visible. And the response from the facility was not to improve conditions. It was to destroy the evidence.
We should also talk about the eavesdropping component of this story. Parents described guards positioning themselves to listen in on private conversations with lawyers, conversations with advocates, even conversations between parents and their own children. This isn't just a violation of privacy. If guards are monitoring attorney-client communications, that is a potential violation of the Sixth Amendment. It undermines the entire legal process that these families are trying to navigate.
And remember, many of these families are asylum seekers. They are people who came to the United States border and presented themselves legally, asking for protection under both U.S. and international law. They are not criminals. They are detained in facilities that look like prisons, run by corporations that profit from incarceration, and now their children's artwork is being treated as contraband. I want every viewer to sit with that for a moment.
The broader pattern here is one we've seen accelerating: the systematic dehumanization of immigrant families in detention. When you confiscate a child's drawing, you're not just taking a piece of paper. You're telling that child that their voice doesn't matter, that their experience is something to be hidden, that the people in power are afraid of what a 5-year-old might reveal with a box of crayons. That is the definition of punching down.
And let's name the power structure. ICE sets the policy. CoreCivic executes it and profits from it. The Department of Homeland Security oversees both. And Congress funds the entire apparatus. Every single taxpayer is implicated in this system. The question is whether we're going to demand accountability or look the other way while children's testimonies are shredded.
Let's move now to a story that takes us halfway around the world but connects directly to the same theme of state control, this time in Uganda. According to reporting from The Guardian, 2 women have been arrested and detained after allegedly kissing in public. Their names are Wendy Faith, a 22-year-old musician known as Torero Bay, and Elise Diana Denise, who is 21. They were taken into custody after police raided their rented room in the northwestern city of Arua.
Alex, the critical context here is Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act, which was signed into law in 2023. Under this legislation, same-sex activity can carry a sentence of life imprisonment. And in the most extreme cases, what the law calls aggravated homosexuality, the penalty is death. We are talking about a legal framework where a kiss between 2 consenting adults can result in spending the rest of your life behind bars.
The Guardian's reporting notes that this case has outraged the LGBTQ+ community and human rights activists both inside Uganda and internationally. But outrage alone doesn't protect Wendy and Elise. They are sitting in custody right now, facing charges that could define the rest of their lives. And the chilling effect extends far beyond these 2 women. Every LGBTQ+ person in Uganda is living under the shadow of this law, knowing that any expression of who they are could trigger state violence.
Let's talk about who pushed for this law and why. Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act didn't emerge in a vacuum. It has deep connections to American evangelical organizations that have spent decades exporting anti-LGBTQ+ ideology to African nations. Investigative reporting over the years has documented how US-based groups provided funding, legal frameworks, and political strategy to Ugandan lawmakers pushing for criminalization. This is not just a Ugandan story. It is a story about the globalization of bigotry.
And the enforcement pattern is telling. Police didn't just encounter these women kissing on a street corner. According to The Guardian, officers raided their rented room. Think about what that means. Law enforcement actively sought them out in a private space. This suggests surveillance, tip-offs, or targeted enforcement. It's the kind of policing that turns neighbors into informants and private homes into crime scenes.
The human cost is staggering. Wendy Faith is a musician, an artist, someone whose life is about expression and connection. Elise Diana Denise is 21 years old. These are young women at the beginning of their lives, now facing the possibility of life in prison because they expressed affection for each other. The cruelty is the point. The law exists not just to punish but to terrorize an entire community into invisibility.
And we need to connect this back to the global picture. Uganda is not an outlier. Across the African continent, across the Middle East, across parts of Asia, we are seeing a wave of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation that mirrors and often directly borrows from Western conservative playbooks. The same rhetoric, the same legal strategies, the same dehumanizing language. When we talk about human rights, we cannot treat these as isolated incidents. They are nodes in a global network of persecution.
What's particularly painful is the international response, or lack thereof. Western governments issue statements of concern, but trade relationships continue, aid packages flow, diplomatic ties remain intact. If 2 women facing life in prison for a kiss doesn't trigger meaningful consequences, then we need to ask what our stated commitment to human rights actually means in practice. Words without action are just performance.
Absolutely. Now let's shift to Hong Kong, where the government just announced a 1.2 billion Hong Kong dollars investment in sports development. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, lawmaker Kenneth Fok Kai Kong, who is also vice president of the city's Sports Federation and Olympic Committee, welcomed the budget, calling it, and I'm quoting here, a timely boost that will inject fresh momentum.
On the surface, this looks like a straightforward good news story. Government invests in sports, athletes benefit, city builds toward hosting the Asian Games. But Alex, context matters enormously here. This announcement comes against the backdrop of Hong Kong's dramatic transformation since the 2020 national security law. We're talking about a city where dozens of pro-democracy activists are in prison, where independent media has been gutted, where civil society organizations have been forced to disband. And now the government is pouring over $1 billion Hong Kong dollars into sports spectacles.
Kenneth Fok is a fascinating figure to center this story around. He's not just a lawmaker and sports official. He's a member of one of Hong Kong's wealthiest and most politically connected families, the Fok family dynasty. His grandfather, Henry Fok, was one of the most prominent pro-Beijing businessmen in Hong Kong's history. So when Kenneth Falk praises this budget as inspiring, we should understand that this is someone who sits at the intersection of political power, business interests, and Beijing's strategic vision for Hong Kong.
And let's talk about what that strategic vision looks like. The 1.2 billion Hong Kong dollars isn't just about developing athletes. Falk himself acknowledged that the spending would be subject to a comprehensive review of athlete support planned after the Asian Games. The language is bureaucratic, but the implication is clear. This money is primarily about staging a successful international sporting event that projects an image of Hong Kong as a thriving, normal, open city. It's soft power, and it's being purchased with public funds.
The playbook is well documented, Maya. Authoritarian and semi-authoritarian governments have used major sporting events as legitimacy tools for decades. The 2008 Beijing Olympics, the 2018 Russia World Cup, the 2022 Qatar World Cup, every single one was accompanied by promises of openness and reform, and every single one was followed by continued or escalated repression. Hong Kong bidding for or hosting the Asian Games would follow this exact pattern.
What's particularly telling is what the budget does not include. While 1.2 billion Hong Kong dollars goes to sports, Hong Kong continues to underfund legal aid for political prisoners, continues to restrict press freedom, continues to shrink the space for public dissent. The priorities are a statement of values. A government that spends billions on games while jailing journalists and activists is telling you exactly what it cares about, and it's not the well-being of its people.
Falk's call for a more strategic approach to building a sustainable sports industry is also worth unpacking. In Hong Kong's current political environment, strategic and sustainable are loaded terms. They suggest long-term integration with Beijing's broader national development plans. Sports becomes another vector for political alignment, another institution brought under the umbrella of central government priorities. The athletes themselves become instruments of state messaging.
And for Hong Kong's people, the message is clear: the government will spend lavishly on spectacles that enhance its international image, but dissent, free expression, and democratic participation remain off the table. It's the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook: give them circuses and hope they stop asking for freedom.
Now let's turn to our science stories, and I want to start with the research published in Nature about vectorized instructive signals in cortical dendrites. Maya, I know this sounds deeply technical, but the implications are profound.
It really is remarkable, Alex. Researchers studying mice learning a neurofeedback brain-computer interface task discovered that the brain appears to use neuron-specific teaching signals in cortical dendrites, the branching extensions of nerve cells that receive input from other neurons. What this means in plain language is that the brain has a far more sophisticated system for assigning credit during learning than we previously understood. It's not just one big signal saying good job or try again. Each individual neuron appears to receive its own targeted instruction about how to adjust.
This is what the researchers describe as a vectorized solution for credit assignment. In machine learning, credit assignment, figuring out which specific parts of a network contributed to a correct or incorrect output, is one of the fundamental challenges. The dominant approach in artificial intelligence is backpropagation, which sends error signals backward through a network. For decades, neuroscientists debated whether the biological brain uses anything similar. This research suggests it does, but in a way that's potentially more elegant and efficient than our artificial systems.
The implications cascade outward, Alex. If the brain truly uses vectorized teaching signals, meaning each neuron gets its own personalized feedback, then our models of learning, memory formation, and cognitive development may need significant revision. It also raises questions for the artificial intelligence field. Are we building neural networks that are crude approximations of something far more nuanced? Could understanding this biological mechanism lead to fundamentally better AI architectures?
And here's where I want our viewers to think critically about funding and priorities. This kind of basic neuroscience research is exactly the work that gets squeezed when governments prioritize applied science with immediate commercial returns. Understanding how the brain learns at the cellular level doesn't produce a product next quarter. But it could reshape medicine, education, and technology for generations. The question is whether our funding structures are capable of supporting research on that timescale.
Which brings us perfectly to our final story, also from Nature, about a compound called acetate that enhances long-term memory in mice, but only in females. Researchers found that this simple chemical compound, which is naturally produced in the body as a metabolic byproduct, helps female rodents form stronger long-term memories but is significantly less effective in males.
Maya, this is a story about sex differences in biology, and it's one that illuminates a systemic failure in medical research. For the vast majority of biomedical research history, studies were conducted primarily or exclusively on male subjects, male animals, male cells, male humans. The assumption was that findings would apply universally. That assumption has been proven catastrophically wrong in field after field, from cardiovascular disease to pain management to drug metabolism.
Exactly. The fact that acetate works differently in female versus male mice is not a quirky footnote. It's a flashing neon sign pointing to the reality that sex-based biological differences affect everything from how we form memories to how we respond to treatments. For decades, women were systematically excluded from clinical trials. The NIH didn't require the inclusion of female animals in preclinical research until 2016. Think about how much we've missed.
And this has real-world consequences. If a memory-enhancing compound works primarily in females, that has implications for conditions like Alzheimer's disease, which disproportionately affects women. Nearly 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. If we're studying memory and cognition primarily in male subjects, we are by definition failing the population most affected by memory disorders.
The acetate finding also raises fascinating questions about the gut-brain axis and metabolic pathways. Acetate is produced by gut bacteria during the fermentation of dietary fiber. So we're looking at a potential link between diet, gut microbiome composition, sex hormones, and memory formation. The complexity is extraordinary, and it underscores why reductive, one-size-fits-all approaches to medicine are so dangerous.
What I find most striking is the honest acknowledgement in the research that they don't fully understand why the sex difference exists. That honesty is actually a sign of good science. But it also highlights how much fundamental biology we still don't understand, precisely because we spent so many decades studying only half the population. The knowledge gap is not an accident, it's the result of choices made by funding bodies, institutional review boards, and researchers who defaulted to male subjects out of convenience.
And we should name the structural issue: medical research still operates within frameworks that were built by and for men. The inclusion of female subjects is improving, but it remains inconsistent. When a study like this acetate research explicitly examines sex differences and finds a striking disparity, it's doing the work that should have been standard practice for decades. Every study that doesn't examine sex differences is potentially missing half the picture.
Now, Maya, let's do what Truth Report does best: connect these stories and find the pattern. Because on the surface, we've covered children's art in a Texas detention center, 2 women arrested in Uganda, a sports budget in Hong Kong, brain learning mechanisms in mice, and a memory compound that works differently across sexes. 5 stories, 5 different countries, 5 different beats. But there is a thread.
The thread is visibility and who gets to control it. At Dilley, the authorities are confiscating children's artwork because those drawings make the invisible visible. They expose conditions that the government and its private contractors want hidden. In Uganda, 2 women are being punished for making their relationship visible, for the act of kissing in public, for refusing to hide who they are. The state demands invisibility, and when people refuse, it brings the full weight of the law down on them.
In Hong Kong, the dynamic is inverted but the mechanism is the same. The government is investing 1.2 billion Hong Kong dollars in making a specific image hypervisible, Hong Kong as a vibrant, world-class city hosting international sporting events. Meanwhile, the political prisoners, the silenced journalists, the disbanded civil society groups, they are being deliberately rendered invisible. The sports spectacle is a screen, and behind that screen, repression continues unchecked.
And in the neuroscience stories, we see the same pattern playing out in research itself. For decades, the female half of the population was invisible in medical research. Male was treated as default, as universal, as the only body worth studying. The acetate finding doesn't just reveal a sex difference in memory formation, it reveals the staggering cost of that historical invisibility. How many treatments have we missed? How many lives could have been saved if we had simply bothered to look?
The credit assignment research tells us something profound about how learning actually works, that the brain gives each individual neuron its own specific feedback. Every cell matters. Every signal is personalized. And yet our social and political systems operate on exactly the opposite principle: erasing individuality, enforcing conformity, punishing difference. The biology of the brain says every neuron deserves its own instruction. Our governments say entire populations don't deserve to be seen.
And this is where the investigative lens sharpens. Who benefits from invisibility? In every single one of these stories, the answer is the same: existing power structures. CoreCivic benefits when detained children can't show the world what their lives look like. Uganda's political establishment benefits when LGBTQ+ citizens are terrorized into hiding. Hong Kong's government benefits when the world sees athletes instead of prisoners. The pharmaceutical and biomedical industries benefit when they can develop treatments based on male-only data and market them as universal.
Control of visibility is control of narrative. Control of narrative is control of power. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's the documented operating principle of every institution we've discussed tonight. And the people who challenge that control, the children who draw, the women who kiss, the researchers who insist on including female subjects, those are the people who face consequences. Because the one thing power cannot tolerate is being seen clearly.
So what do we do with this? We refuse to look away. We amplify the voices being silenced. We demand that our governments, our corporations, and our research institutions operate in the light. The children at Dilley deserve to have their artwork seen. Wendy Faith and Elise Diana Denise deserve to live openly without fear of life imprisonment. Hong Kong's people deserve a government that invests in their freedom, not just their entertainment. And women deserve medical research that treats them as full human beings, not as an afterthought.
I want to come back to something specific about the Dilley story, because I think it captures the moral stakes perfectly. A child in detention picks up a crayon and draws what they see. That drawing is not a political statement. It's not propaganda. It's not a legal brief. It's a child processing their reality through the most basic, most human form of expression. And a guard, an adult employed by the state, acting on orders from a chain of command that extends all the way to Washington, walks over and takes it away. That is the moment where policy becomes cruelty. That is the line, and we have crossed it.
And that cruelty is not free. It costs us. It costs us morally, obviously. But it costs us practically too. Children who are stripped of their ability to express and process trauma carry that trauma into the future. They carry it into their communities, their families, their own children. The confiscation of a drawing is not a small act. It's an investment in future suffering, paid for with public money, executed by private corporations, and justified by a political establishment that has decided some children's voices are too dangerous to be heard.
That's our show for tonight. Every story we covered points to the same truth: the most powerful weapon against authoritarianism, against bigotry, against systemic erasure, is visibility. The drawing. The kiss. The research that includes everyone. The journalism that names names and follows money. They want you looking at the spectacle. We want you looking at what's behind it.
If these stories matter to you, and they should, then do something with them. Share them. Talk about them. Contact your representatives about conditions at family detention centers. Support organizations fighting for LGBTQ+ rights in Uganda and across the globe. Demand that medical research represent the full diversity of human biology. And most importantly, never accept the version of reality that power wants to hand you. Question it. Investigate it. Tear it apart and see what's underneath.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. See you next time, and remember, the truth doesn't hide. It gets hidden. Your job is to find it.
Good night.